Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar about three different initiatives currently being undertaken by members of the ArchivesSpace community to improve the application and to contribute these back to ArchivesSpace. I'm Jessica Crouch, the Community Engagement Lead for ArchivesSpace, and I'm joined today by Sela Constan-Wahl from Getty, Alicia Detelich and Mary Kidd from Yale, Regina Carra of City University of New York, and Jonathan Brier and Greta Sutter of Ohio University. And we're all joined by ArchivesSpace Lead Program Manager Christine DeBella and ArchivesSpace Program Assistant Bailey Grace Harrell. First in this session, Sela Constan-Wahl will present a proposed core code contribution to ArchivesSpace that adds user-centered audit tables to ArchivesSpace. It will also add an activity stream to the API that follows W3C standards for encoding activity metadata as JSON LD. The need for this contribution came out of a joint project between Smithsonian and Getty to process and make available the Johnson Publishing Company archive. Sela is the project manager for library and archival systems at Getty, where she manages systems and their related projects, working closely with the Getty Research Institute and Getty Conservation Institute. She holds a Master's of Science in Information from the University of Michigan and a Master's of Music Performance from Indiana University Jacobs School of Music. She has worked at Getty for 6 years and has 15 years of experience in libraries and archives of all types. Next up, Alicia Detelich and Mary Kidd from Yale will present their work to improve make representative functionality in ArchivesSpace, as well as other improvements to how the application manages digital objects. Mary is the technical lead for archival systems in Yale University Library's IT department and the service owner for ArchivesSpace. And Alicia is the assistant director for Special Collections Metadata Services at Yale's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library. I really wanted to say rare. She serves as product owner of Yale's ArchivesSpace instance. And last but not least, Regina Carra of CUNY and Jonathan Brier and Greta Sutter of Ohio University will update the community on their wikidata plugin development project. Regina will provide an overview on how this work began, including some of the issues that brought representatives from 5 stakeholder organizations together to envision and fundraise for the creation of the plugin. Next, Jonathan and Greta will discuss their recent work to devise the data mapping for the wiki plugin and the questions this process raised along the way. The presenters will also share how they envision using this plugin to contribute to a larger ecosystem of wiki open data projects. Regina, her, is the Outreach and Processing Archivist at the City University of New York, working on a 3-year Mellon-funded project to survey and amplify archival collections held across CUNY's 26 campuses. She is also a member of the ArchivesSpace Trainers Corps. Jonathan is the Data Services Librarian at Ohio University Libraries, where he supports research data management, data literacy, and open data initiatives. He holds an MS in information from the University of Michigan and has extensive experience in citizen science, scholarly communication, and linked open data projects. His work focuses on empowering researchers through tools, training, and strategies for effective data use and impact. Greta is the Manuscripts Archivist at Ohio University Library's Mon Center for Archives and Special Collections. She holds an MLIS from the University of Washington and an MA in Art History from George Mason University. She specializes in preserving and providing access to unique historical materials, supporting research, and teaching across disciplines. She's an active member of professional organizations and contributes to advancing archival practices through scholarship and collaboration. This session is being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel and website soon. You'll notice that your microphone and camera are both muted. Please feel free to talk with fellow attendees via the chat, or if you have a question about the content of the webinar, please post those questions in the Q&A option. We'll be holding questions until the end of each individual presentation, and then I'll read those questions in the Q&A during that time. So we'll have 3 separate Q&As for each presentation. We do have a fairly large number of people registered for today's webinar, representing a variety of experiences and skill sets. Please keep in mind that all attendees and participants in this webinar are expected to adhere to the ArchivesSpace Code of Conduct, and all attendees should be considerate and respectful in their interactions in the Q&A and chat. I'll drop a link in just a moment where you can find our Code of Conduct as well as our community's core values. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to you, Sela, and stop sharing my screen.
Great, thank you. Give me 1 second while I get my Zoom configured. There we go. Hello, everyone. I want to make sure you can see my presentation slides.
We can.
Thank you. I'm Sela Constan-Wahl, and I'm the product manager for library and archival systems at Getty. I'm presenting on the core code contribution we'd like to make to ArchivesSpace that would add user-based auditing tables as well as an activity stream to the API to better enable audit event tracking and systems integration. I'll start with some history that has led us to this contribution, then I'll cover what it is we're proposing, why we're proposing this, who is involved, and how we hope to gain your input. At Getty, the need for this change to ArchivesSpace came about a few years ago when we moved our entire discovery layer for archival materials from a flat file website that would only display the finding aids with links to digitized materials to a platform we call the research collections pages. The new platform is a modern tech stack utilizing IIIF, linked data, a series of ETLs and APIs to take data that comes from ArchivesSpace, Rosetta, our preservation system, OTMM, our access copy dams, and Arches, a system we use to manage data about the human-made object, to display digitized materials in context with collection information. The new platform is radically different from the old platform since it ties relationships across all of those systems of record together into one discovery layer, as opposed to displaying of the EAD and whatever links could be there. And so the infrastructure required to run this is quite a bit bigger than before. We now harvest metadata weekly from ArchivesSpace to feed into the platform, and we have found that harvest process quite onerous. Without a single API endpoint to know exactly what's changed across resources, archival objects, digital objects, containers, agents, subjects, and so forth, our developers had to write a series of scripts that pull out everything currently published to retransform every week. The API also doesn't easily report on when records merge, publishing flags change, finding aid statuses change, or when things are deleted, compounding all of our issues. And our archivists have also had to be careful about the way that they work on archival metadata. If something is set to published, they can't unpublish it without notifying me and our developers so we can make sure to remove the resource and all of the linked components, agents, subjects, and other relationships from all the other systems from display. Deleting or merging anything set to published is also a no-no, which isn't great because we often don't know that it needs to be removed from the front end unless someone reports it. And sometimes that doesn't happen for a few months after the data is changed in ArchivesSpace. These issues have created friction between archivists and developers and restricts everyone's ability to do their jobs to the best of their abilities. And an easier way to monitor what's updated would greatly improve this situation. And the other major project that has made the need for our event reporting come to a head is our joint project with Smithsonian to process and make available the Johnson Publishing Company Archive, or JPCA. We're using the Research Collections platform to provide access to digital resources, but the systems that feed into the Discovery platform are split between two institutions. We're using a second instance of ArchivesSpace just for JPCA that Getty's Chicago archivists are describing the collection in. Smithsonian has a bespoke application for validating data coming from mass digitization that consumes ASpace metadata during validation. They're also supplying the dams and producing IIIF based on data in ArchivesSpace and dams. Getty is running the rest of the applications, including Arches, ID Manager, used to record relationships based on unique identifiers, and the Research Collections platform. All of these systems are supposed to be integrated, and ArchivesSpace is the base of all of the data and all of the ways that people work with the data. And so not knowing right now when something is new or changed or moved becomes quite difficult. And because of all of these different systems, our work is very intertwined. So we are collaborating to define the needs for the auditing and the activity stream to make sure that it works for JPCA and for a variety of other projects and institutions. Both Getty and Smithsonian see other needs for auditing and an activity stream and other workflows. So there have been similar projects to this in the past. The most recent one that I'm familiar with is the AS History plugin. AS History was developed by Hudson Malonglo in collaboration with Gaia Resources for the Queensland State Archives Digital Archives Program. It creates versions with detailed audit metadata, meaning the focus is on records and managing the changes to those records. It is compatible for version 4.0, which is super important for any plugin right now. And it's both, I think of it as a front end and a back end plugin, meaning it doesn't just create versions in the database, but they've developed a way to be able to revert to a past version in the main record. And in addition to retaining audit data. And from our perspective, there are some considerable downsides to using this plugin for the things that we need to be able to do in the application. The first being that it's a very big plugin with a lot of added data stored in the server, requiring infrastructure to support that data. It's also records-based and not necessarily user-based, though there is user data, audit data being recorded. And it appears to lack the succinct event reporting that is needed when records are merged or deleted and so forth. But the biggest drawback that we see is that it was designed exclusively for the Queensland State Archives heavily customized flavor of ArchivesSpace, meaning it's not and will not be designed or maintained to fit the needs of the community. And this is totally fine because it is a plugin. That's what plugins are for. But that also means that it's not a great option for other institutions to build expensive integrations off of or to benefit from. So what are we developing? We have a few goals. Our goals are to build audit event reporting within the database that's user-based and can tell a story about how data changes and moves. We want to build an activity stream that follows W3C standards to ensure interoperability with other applications that have activity streams and tools that are designed to consume activity stream type data. We'd like community input to build reporting in ArchivesSpace so that institutions that don't have access to development staff, time, or money can also benefit from this contribution. We're hoping for your input on that. And finally, we do not want to build something that exponentially increases the infrastructure requirements for running ArchivesSpace, especially in our current funding climate. I do believe that if we meet these goals, this project can provide the foundation for ArchivesSpace to eventually have something like version control that's manageable, but I do think that version control should be something created and developed by the community, so that however it's designed, it's institution agnostic and sustainable by the development team. So with that said, we are quite firm in stating that version control is out of scope for this project, but we're hoping we are creating the foundation for it in the future. So to dig into the details a bit regarding the auditing data, when a user makes a change to the data, the username, time, type of change, and the URI of what changed should be recorded. This includes deletions, publishing flag changes, status flag changes, data merging, and field updates. We recommend that each record type in ArchivesSpace retain its own audit table. However, that decision will be better informed by Hudson Malonglow's insights and ArchivesSpace developers' insights once we get to the stage where technical requirements are fully mapped out. The data in the audit table or tables is what populates the activity stream. So we can use some of the activity stream standards provided by W3C to help inform auditing data models. And we do still have some outstanding questions that we will need to explore with Hudson Malonglow and representatives from the ASpace community. Those include if someone is working on a resource and does the same type of change resulting in saving the record, say 15 times in 1 hour, say they could be adding notes or agents to a resource and saving after every note. Is that considered one change or multiple changes? How often do you want to see that in your log file or in your audit? Does there need to be a data size limit to the audit table to ensure that we don't run into infrastructure issues? Again, that's a primary concern for us. What is required to populate the audit table the first time it is added to a live ArchivesSpace instance, and how long could that take? And are there requirements to anonymize and de-identify user data in the audit table after a certain period of time to comply with data privacy policies for public institutions? Like I said, we'll work through these questions and others that come up during development with Hudson Malonglow Smithsonian and members of the ASpace community. The activity stream is a bit more clear-cut because there are standards. We plan to follow W3C standards and return audit events or activities as JSON LD. Data in an activity stream is paginated, so that makes it super easy if there was a new data to see if there was new data by checking to see if new pages were added, or by looking at the count of the total number of activities for the on the last page or on the ordered collection. The structure of an activity stream is predefined and includes an ordered collection page, and a list of activities ordered chronologically. I'll walk through what these data elements can look like using data from our mockup of an ASpace activity stream, but note that this mockup is super rough and has no real data in it, but it should give you at least a sense of the function of the pages. So first, the ordered collection represents the entire activity stream. It tells you what it is and the first and last page, and often gives you a total item count. It's quite basic, but it can also be very useful for development. Next, an ordered collection page is a single page in the activity stream. It's used to return a reasonable amount of activities in a single request. So say 10 or 100 or whatever that turns out to be. There's a list of activities called events returned on each page, and the links to the previous and next ordered collection page in the sequence. And each event has its own unique URL as well. And that's because there's an event page, an activity page. So each activity or event corresponding to a line in the audit table has its own page with the information needed to know what's happened. It can represent data about a single component or multiple, depending on the type of activity being represented. An activity for a single component would communicate things like creation, deletion, updates, or status publishing changes. And an activity for multiple components would relate data about moves and merges. This example is of a merge. So under objects, it lists two things that were merged, and it also lists the target. So you know what thing was merged with what, and can give you an idea of what URI still exists in ASpace for that thing, especially with record merging. You lose a URI at that point. So that's an important thing to track. And we also have outstanding questions of the activity stream, namely, should institutions be able to turn the activity stream on and off? What does it mean if an institution turns it off, then turns it back on? Does the old activity stream become archived and it's built fresh from when it's turned back on? Back history needs to be built for institutions with existing ASpace instances that want to turn this on, and it should be a one-off task, but we don't quite know what that looks like yet or how long it would take to run, similar to the audit table. We don't know what authentication or authorization requirements are for the audit API, and we don't know if or when the activity stream should archive pages or how to access that archived data. All of that, those questions are still outstanding, and we'll be working on these in the near term. And again, much of what we discussed is backend only and requires some development time and skills to be able to use once they're available. So we want to add reporting functionality to the front end for institutions that have, excuse me, that don't have this bandwidth. We'll be soliciting input from all of you to learn what could be helpful. For example, do you need to report on the amount of changes made to a single resource over time? Do you need to pull user-specific reports to provide metrics to tell the story of how people are using the archive? And any other ideas are very much welcome. So we've covered the history, and you now have a better picture of what exactly we're proposing, but why are we going about it like this? We have 3 different whys that I'll cover. The first is why a core code contribution and not a plugin. One is that audit tables are standard in other applications, so this would bring ASpace up to that standard. Activity streams are becoming more standard in many cultural heritage applications, so it would make it possible to more easily develop integrations. And so a core code contribution makes sense because in part we'd be bringing the application up to existing standards, but also it's something that everyone can benefit from, and they aren't tailored to just the wishes of a single institution. Our next why is, again, why an activity stream? One, because there are standards existing for it, and it's becoming a lot more prevalent in cultural heritage. Other systems like dams have activity streams, so integrations between ASpace and applications like OTMM can become easier to manage. And our last why, which we have to reiterate, why not include version control? Predominantly, it's the size of the database. We don't want to implement anything that might price smaller institutions out of archive space, and those costs are both financial and technical. And the project would be very large to include both back-end and front-end changes in one go, and have those changes be version control. We don't feel like we have the insights to be able to develop version control in a way that would be helpful to most A-Space institutions, and I really do believe that should come from A-Space developers in the future. And finally, who is going to be working on this? This is a big project. We're contracting with Hudson Malonglo to make sure it's done well and it fits with the existing ArchivesSpace infrastructure. They know ArchivesSpace incredibly well. They built the AS History plugin. They understand what it means to build something like this. Mark Custer and his team at Smithsonian will also weigh in on development decisions, so it's not a Getty-only solution. And we'll also be working with the ArchivesSpace developers to make sure contributions are incremental and not onerous to review and approve before merging into the main code base. And our last who is hopefully some of you. There are standards that dictate what an activity stream is, and we trust Hudson Malonglo to understand how to develop the audit table to support it and whatever we need to do. However, we don't yet know what reports we could build that would be the most used to other institutions, especially those without the capacity to use the activity stream or to get to the audit data in the SQL. To get your input generally on interest in this core code contribution, as well as an idea of what reporting could look like, we've created a survey. We'd like to begin work in the new year, so if you could please submit any comments or questions you have by January 8th, that would be greatly appreciated. Also, if you leave report ideas and your contact information, I will most likely be reaching out to you in the very near future to ensure I understand what it is you're asking for. And with that, thank you, and are there questions?
Thank you, Sela. That was great. I know that a lot of people are very interested in this functionality, and I can think about times in my past life working with ArchivesSpace at an institution where this information would have been really helpful. Would you mind going back one slide to the QR code so that if people didn't get a chance to snag that, maybe they can get a chance to do that now. And then if anyone has any questions, please do drop those into the Q&A. We don't have any right at this second, but I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for that. We're going to be handling Q&As after each individual session. So if you do have questions of Sela, now is the time to ask them. And of course, you can fill out that survey and contribute there as well if you need to.
Yeah, I know.
Put your
That
thoughts
gives
together.
you,
Yeah.
gives you another way out.
But I think that's really great. And Sela, I really appreciate you presenting today and soliciting feedback in this way. But if there's any other way we can help you amplify that survey, or if you want to drop it into listservs or anything like that, that would be great as well.
Yes, I'll be doing that. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. I'm not seeing any specific questions popping up in the Q&A. I'm going to speak really slowly now, just in case, but I'm not seeing any. So we'll go ahead and move into our next presentation then.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. This is Mary.
Go for it, right?
All right, can you see my PowerPoint presentation?
We can, yeah, just your slide now.
Yep, that's great. Thank you for confirming. All right, so as Riska mentioned, I'm Mary Kidd, and I'm joined here by Alicia Detelich. I'm going to be speaking for kind of the first half of this presentation, and then Alicia will pick up for the last half. So we're going to talk today about enhancing digital object functionality and other enhancements that we're offering to the community. So over the years at Yale, we've built a number of very useful customizations that have genuinely improved how our staff and users experience ArchivesSpace. However, those same customizations have also made upgrades and long-term maintenance fairly challenging for us. This past year, we've been taking a careful look at where our custom work might actually serve the broader ArchivesSpace community and how we can start contributing some of those improvements upstream instead of maintaining them alone forever. We've identified 3 areas where we think Yale's enhancements could meaningfully improve the application for everyone. The first is make representative and thumbnail behavior, and this is the biggest and kind of most complex piece, and where we'll spend most of our time today because the logic of how the system choose thumbnails, captions, and click-through links is surprisingly complicated. Then we'll go into IIIF and a universal viewer integration. And then we'll end by talking about an enhanced staff-side CSV export. We'd really love your feedback on all 3 of these areas. If you feel that these enhancements would be valuable, please let us know. I would suggest that you reach out to the ArchivesSpace users listserv or just reach out individually to myself or Alicia. In any case, we would work with Hudson Malonglo to prepare formal pull requests in the new year. So moving on to Make Representative. So this functionality represents one of Yale's largest areas of customization, and for good reason. This logic underpins nearly every digital object display in the public and staff interfaces, so improving it upstream has the potential to benefit many institutions that use ASpace and in particular digital objects. Part of the challenge here is the complexity of digital digital object records themselves. A single archival object can have multiple digital object instances attached, and each of those instances can have multiple file versions. That data model produces a huge number of possible combinations, and choosing the right thumbnail, caption, and link target becomes surprisingly complicated. So to start, what is Make Representative? The intention behind this feature is to give staff a way to decide which digital image should visually stand in for a record. Make Representative operates at 2 layers. First, at the instance level, you can designate one digital object as the representative for an archival object or resource. And second, within a digital object, you can designate one file version as the representative for that digital object, which supplies the thumbnail, caption, and click-through link. Only one representative can be chosen at each of these levels, and in both cases, the item must be published. The Make Representative button isn't selectable otherwise. In ArchivesSpace version 3.4 and higher, thumbnail selection follows a multi-step process. So first, ASpace selects which digital object instance to use. If one of the linked digital objects is marked representative, that digital object is chosen for thumbnail determination. Next, ArchivesSpace evaluates its file versions using a documented priority order, starting with file versions marked as representative, then looking whether the use statement is set to image thumbnail, whether any published file version has a URI that begins with HTTP or HTTPS, and the Xlink show attribute is set to embed. If none of those conditions are met, ASpace displays a generic icon based on the digital object type. So with that logic in mind, let's walk through a series of cases. For each case I step through, I will be using Yale's development or dev instance, which is basically the ArchivesSpace sandbox with Yale data within it. So in this first case, we are looking at what we're calling the ideal setup. So everything is marked correctly using all the rules that we just went through. And so we should get a thumbnail, caption, and click-through link. So I'm going to go ahead and click on first the archival object record here. All right. Okay, we'll do that one more time. Here we go. So we have our demo resource set up here. We have a series and then files beneath that series. So we're looking at an archival object here that is published. And listed underneath instances is one digital object instance that has been marked as the representative. That's what this blue button here means. And if we look at the digital object record itself, you'll see that it is published, and we have one file version listed beneath. This is a JPEG file, it's published. It is also marked as the representative. It has a caption, use statement is set to image thumbnail, xlink show attribute is embed, and it is a JPEG file format. So all is well here. So let's go back and see what happens when we do a search in the PUI. And I'm going to be vigilantly closing tabs to keep myself organized here. So we see here two results. We have our archival object and our digital object, and each of them has a thumbnail and each of them has a caption. If we click on the archival object record, we have a thumbnail and a caption. And I can click on this thumbnail and that will bring me to the digital object record. And the digital object record has a thumbnail and a caption. No click-through link here, but that's expected for vanilla. So this again is the ideal case here. So moving on to our second case, everything is going to be set up pretty much identical to what we just went through in case one, with one main difference. And that difference is, in the archival object record, we have one digital object instance that is not marked as the representative. So this is toggled off, but otherwise the digital object is set up exactly in the same way as the previous thumbnail we looked at, including it is marked as the representative. So what does that do on the front end? And we'll see here we have two results, but right off the bat, you'll see that the archival object listed has no thumbnail and no caption listed. The digital object does, however, and if we look at the archival object record itself, we see that now there is a thumbnail, but there's no caption, and I can't click on this thumbnail to get to the digital object record. The digital object record, though, is maintaining the thumbnail and the caption. So what that means is that toggling off representative at the instance level has noticeable effects in the PUI, even though the digital object and its file version are valid. This case shows how the archival object's display depends heavily on that representative toggle. So moving on to case 3, we're introducing a new wrinkle. The representative file version exists, but it is not an image. So we've been mostly working with file versions that are clearly JPEG format, but this time we have a representative digital object instance, so that's turned back on again. And if we click onto the digital object record, you'll see here in the file versions, this is now just a link to our catalog, our digital catalog. But otherwise it's not an image. However, it is the representative and it is published. So what does that look like in terms of the PUI? So what you'll see here is now two blank frames. So we have no image, we have no caption listed beneath either result. And if we click on the archival object record, you'll see now this kind of nondescript gray bar that appears. Nothing's clickable, there's no caption. And if we click on the digital object, same thing, there's a nondescript gray bar. So one might argue that this is expected behavior since the file version, right, isn't an image. But the takeaway here is that vanilla ASpace doesn't handle this case very gracefully. There's no fallback behavior, no indication of what went wrong, and no meaningful caption. So we're going to move on to the final case here. And this time we are going to work with multiple digital object instances. So here, again, we have an archival object, and we have now two digital object instances, neither of which is marked as the representative. And we see here we have for digital object A, two file versions, one which is a non-image, it's a IIIF JSON manifest, so it's just some raw data, and this is not marked as the representative. And then we have just a regular thumbnail file version that is marked as the representative. And then for our second digital object instance, digital object B, we have just one file version pointing to another IIIF manifest. So what happens in this scenario? Oh, come back. Let me try it again. Ah, we're having some issues with our dev server, it looks like. Well, I can describe it to you and hopefully it'll pop up on screen here. But basically what we would see on screen is kind of a mixed bag of results. And I can't believe I remember this, but I've practiced. So the archival object would appear on screen without a thumbnail listed next to it. But if you clicked on the archival object record, and well, let's see if this works. No, it doesn't. If you clicked on the archival object record, you would see a thumbnail, but the click-through link would bring you to the JSON IIIF manifest. There would also be a second thumbnail listed beneath there, which would have kind of a generic to ASpace icon, and that would also bring you to the IIIF manifest. And then the second one of the digital objects would have a gray bar appearing in the record, and then the other would actually have a thumbnail and a caption. So sorry that that's not working, but I'm actually very proud of myself for remembering the results. But in either case, what we're seeing here is that when we have this kind of lots of different threads going on, lots of different setups on different file versions, etc. We're seeing kind of just we're kind of seeing like unpredictable behavior up on screen. So we're going to go now that we have these four cases presented, we're going to see what make representative behavior looks like in Yale's custom instance. So when I go through these next examples, I will be using Yale's test instance, which is running our custom code. So at Yale, the thumbnail is always selected through a deterministic process. The system looks at all the file versions available and makes a decision using an order of precedence. So first it checks whether any file version is explicitly marked as the image thumbnail, and this is done using a custom toggle we introduced in our instance, and it's pictured here on screen. It's just a button that says Display Thumbnail. This toggle allows staff to clearly ID which file version is intended as the thumbnail. If no display thumbnail is set, Yale then checks whether any file version is marked representative, and if neither condition is met, Yale looks for the first published file version that is a valid image. So I'll show you what that looks like in practice. So here we have an archival object, and of course, Kaz logged me out. And you get to see the exciting authentication layer that I have to get through. Okay, great. Let's try that again. So now we have an archival object here. This is a live record in our production instance, and it's published, it's a file, and if we scroll down, we'll see that there's one digital object instance listed, and it is not marked as the representative. And this is a typical setup for a digital object instance in Archives at Yale. When I click on the digital object record itself, you'll see here there are three file versions. So the first file version is a IIIF manifest with our IIIF viewer embedded in this, and you'll see a little bit more of this when Alicia talks in a little bit. Next, we have our thumbnail image. And again, this is a JPEG file, it's published, it has a caption, and it is not set as the representative. However, it is set as the display thumbnail. So you can see this button has been toggled on. That's our custom button that we have in our instance. And lastly, we have a file version that is a link out to our catalog, and this is set as the representative. So remember in the second case that I showed you using vanilla ASpace, when we didn't mark the digital object instance as the representative, we already started to see some problems. But in the case of our test instance, or sorry, our production instance here, you're seeing that we have two search results and both of them have a thumbnail. We do not list captions under the thumbnail in our search results, and that's by design. And if we click on the digital record here, this is our IIIF viewer, and beneath that is where you'll find our thumbnail, as well as a caption and a click-through link, and that will bring you right to the digital catalog. And the same goes for the archival object as well. You'll see a thumbnail and a caption, as well as a click-through link to the digital catalog. So what we're seeing here is that we do not need to rely on the representative flag to tell ASpace which file version should be the thumbnail and which should be the click-through link. Those decisions are made by evaluating all of the available file versions and choosing the most appropriate for each purpose. So moving on to our next example here, we're looking at how Yale's predictable behavior carries through when an archival object has multiple digital objects attached to it. When multiple DO instances are present, Yale does honor the instance level representative. However, it also has fallback logic to handle cases where there are no eligible representative DO instances with eligible file versions. Yale's polling logic scans all other DO instances and their file versions to determine this, as I'll demonstrate in this next example. So here we have an archival object, and it is associated with two digital object instances. The first is a preservicate entry, not marked as the representative. And this has two file versions, none of which are marked as the representative, none of which are marked as the thumbnail, and this entire digital object instance is not published at all. The second digital object is set up in the same way that you've seen before with thumbnails, where we have our IIIF manifest, we have our thumbnail, which has been marked as the display thumbnail using our custom toggle, and our digital catalog link. And again, this is set as the representative, not the thumbnail. So what happens here? And you'll see in the search results, again, we have two thumbnails appearing next to both the archival object and the digital object. And if you click on each record, you'll see again the thumbnail, the caption, and the click-through link brings you right to the catalog. And it's the same for the digital object as well. So again, what this tells us is that Yale's customization treats the representative flag as just one consideration among many, but not the decisive one. If the representative DO doesn't contain a valid thumbnail, Yale won't force that DO to serve as the visual representative. Instead, the system focuses on the thumbnail toggle and finds the most appropriate file version to display. This is particularly helpful in cases of human error or legacy data migration where the representative flag may have been set incorrectly. Rather than producing empty thumbnails or broken links, the system simply finds the best available thumbnail and uses that. So I'm going to end with the last example where I'll show you how Yale handles non-image file versions. And again, we looked at the same kind of example with vanilla ASpace and we got, empty frames and, gray bars. So in this example here, it's pretty simply set up where we have a archival object listed here. We have a representative digital object instance, and that is set up so that it just has one file version that is a link to the digital catalog. So it's not an image, but by accident, it was set as the display thumbnail and it was set as the representative as well. Oops. So what happens on the front end here? And what we'll see is that ASpace, for lack of there being a file version attached to an image, will just put this stand-in icon in its place instead, which is really nice. And if I click on the archival object record here, you'll see that stand-in icon again. And you'll see that there's a caption. So interestingly enough, there was no caption set. So it derived a caption from the digital object record's title, which is really nice. And then if you click on the click-through link, it'll bring you right to the digital catalog. So that's it for my examples. I just want to point out an extra convenience that comes along with this logic, which is that in the finding aid view, which is also known as the collection organization view in vanilla ASpace, we have thumbnails appearing in this view here as the user scrolls along with captions. So this is definitely, not the biggest piece of fixing this logic. It's just kind of a nice to have, but it's definitely something that offers a more intuitive browsing experience in the PUI. So to conclude, I want to just end with reviewing what Yale fixes. So the main strength of Yale's customization is that it makes thumbnail, caption, and click-through behavior predictable. Thumbnails appear when they should, fallbacks appear when they are needed, and users never encounter broken images or empty boxes. The representative toggle no longer overrides or interferes with thumbnail selection, and captions follow a clear hierarchy that always provides meaningful context. We strongly believe these improvements, if accepted by the community, would benefit ASpace users broadly. I mentioned already, we're working closely with Hudson Malonglo on our upgrade and decustomization efforts, and we're prepared to contribute this work upstream so that thumbnail handling is more reliable for everyone. We really welcome your feedback as we move forward. And so with that, I'll hand things over to Alicia, who's going to pick up the thread and talk about how we're implementing a IIIF viewer at Yale. Thank you very much.
All right, let me just get my screen shared here. Can all see that?
Yep.
Let me just get my presentation going. Oh, where'd it go? All right. So yeah, thanks so much. So I am going to talk about a couple of other features that we're hoping to submit to the ArchivesSpace core code early in the new year. So the first feature is, as Mary mentioned, AAAF integration, which would be an entirely new feature to ArchivesSpace. So we worked with Hudson Malonglo to develop this functionality in 2021 and 22. And we've been using it really extensively since then. We have about 85,000 IIIF manifest links in our digital object records right now. So I want to show a little bit about how we configure and activate the viewer. So to do that, you basically just need to set a few options in your configuration file. And then when you create a digital object record for a IIIF image, you need to complete the file version record or subrecord in a certain way. So here you see the configuration file. And we have configuration options for the IIIF viewer. You'll notice that there is a IIIF viewer URL configuration option. So it's important to note that in our implementation, the viewer that's displayed is not like within ArchivesSpace itself. So our instance doesn't ship with a viewer that will be activated just by including a manifest in the file version. Instead, what happens is this configuration option points to a viewer URL, which is external to the application. So a lot of institutions who are creating these IIIF manifests will already have a viewer set up as part of like a digital library, something like that. However, if you don't already have that, it's really easy to set one up. Even on something like GitHub Pages or a simple site like that. And there are lots of resources online to get you started. In our case, we have a couple of different viewers set up. The default being our main digital collection site, which uses Universal Viewer, and one other one that's only used by specific repositories. So I just want to note too that you don't necessarily need to include multiple viewers unless you are wanting to use like a different type of viewer for a given set of images. So if you have like a single default viewer set, in general, you can display manifests that are stored on different servers throughout that viewer. So, for instance, our default viewer is the digital collection site, but we can also run IIIF manifests from Aviary or other platforms through that viewer, and they work just fine. And then the other options you see here are just the criteria that the application will look for when defining a IIIF image in ArchivesSpace. So if the application sees these fields filled out in this way, it will know that the file version is a IIIF image, and it will use the viewer URL to generate that image on the digital object and archival object pages of the public interface. So here's how the file version looks in the staff interface in ArchivesSpace. You have your IIIF manifest link here in the file URI field. And then you set those other fields, 3 fields, the file format name, the X-link show attribute, and the use statement. And then you just save it and you're done. So the other fields, caption is not really required. We just use it locally. The representative and display thumbnails don't need to be set explicitly. In order to display your record in the public interface, it does need to be set to publish. Publish equals true at the file version and the digital object level. And then, once you have that, you're pretty much good to go. And then I will show you what that actually looks like in our public interface. So here we have the IIIF image for some correspondence and links and newspapers displayed embedded within an archival object record. In ArchivesSpace, we have a bunch of other records from this same collection there. And then this will look somewhat familiar to you from what Mary just showed. We've got the IIIF here in the file version, the thumbnail, and the link out to the digital library. So just to note though, like while we have these thumbnails and links out to the digital library, you don't need those for the IIIF viewer to work. They were developed at the same time, but it's not required to have those two. And we would actually submit this as like a separate pull request from the rest of the thumbnail handling. All right, so I think that one of the major benefits of this implementation is that it's really lightweight, and it's essentially like optional. So if you choose to use it, that's amazing. But if you don't have any use for it right now, there's no performance cost to you when using the application as you normally would. Essentially, we still use the digital object model in the same way, which is basically is like a glorified linking system. The only downside to like the way that we've implemented this is that the viewer actually working it kind of depends on that external site being up. So if for some reason your digital library site is down, but ArchivesSpace is up, you'll have some issues displaying your images. This has happened to us, every now and then, but it's never really presented a major problem. Usually you just get like a black screen until your hosting site is back up. But really, the main benefit is that, it essentially brings together archival description and the materials themselves. Historically, institutions, including us, have maintained separate systems for archival discovery and digital content, and linking these two things together has really been a persistent challenge. And so this implementation is sort of a way to overcome that challenge and to provide direct access to digitized versions of archival materials within the context of archival description. And this is especially useful, I think, in this example here, when you have a lot of material from a given collection that's digitized, as users can then navigate through this whole hierarchy and access different units of material in its context. So that is IIIF. And let me go back to our next feature. So the other feature we're planning
Alicia,
yeah.
Alicia, I just wanted to give you a time warning. You've got about 3 more minutes.
Okay, I'll go real fast then. So the next feature is a CSV export refactor. So this feature has existed for a long time in ArchivesSpace, but it has not worked very well. If it's worked at all. If you have your configuration option in the config file set to limit CSV fields equals false, you get like a lot, like you get a huge file with a ton of blank fields. You just, it doesn't work very well. And so this is something that we really wanted to use at Yale, because our staff find it really helpful to get these kind of full exports of data from search pages and from the landing pages. So we worked with HM alongside this digital object updates to refactor the CSV exports. And basically what it does is takes JSON and flattens it into a CSV file. And then we have these configuration options, which allow you to add some extra fields if you have like plugins that have additional fields in your database. And then this nested records one kind of limits subrecords and linked records from displaying. If you have like tons of agents linked, it will limit the amount of agents and subrecords that display. All right, so very quickly, I'm just going to show you the very exciting spreadsheets. So this is like the native one from the resource pages. So this is like a 300 megabyte file, and this is what comes out of like standard ArchivesSpace. And you can scroll all the way over here, and you basically get like no data. And then if you look at our implementation, we have this is the same set of data, set of resources, and it basically flattens this record. You have a similar thing with the display with the search results. So this is the vanilla with only the landing page fields, which is kind of it seems like a bug that only shows these even if you have the option set as false. And then this is our implementation, which looks very similar. And I'll note that the size of the file for the the resource landing page is like 4 MB as opposed to the 300 megabytes. And then our search results page, even though it's 15,000 rows, is only like 10 megabytes. So it really streamlines and actually kind of makes the functionality work as you might expect it. Okay, so that's all we have for you today. Thanks again for attending the webinar, letting us speak, and we really look forward to hearing your feedback on the new features.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alicia. Thank you, Mary. Since we're at time, I would ask if you have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A. And then I asked Mary and Alicia if you will respond to them by typing your responses in the Q&A. So please make sure like any questions or comments go to that Q&A option so that we can answer them in that way. But I'm sure that everyone is thinking like, yes, please give me that. That sounds really good. But yeah, if anyone could just drop your questions in the Q&A and Alicia and Mary, if you could get to those, because we're going to go ahead and move on. Regina is already sharing her screen to our last presentation, which is an update on the Wikidata plugin for ArchivesSpace. Regina, take it away.
All right, thanks, Jessica. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here, and to the program team for putting this excellent webinar together. I'm excited to provide an update on the project to develop a Wikidata agent plugin for ArchivesSpace. We provided a similar update about this project fairly recently at the ArchivesSpace member forum at SAA this year. There, my colleague, CUNY colleague, Natalie Milbrodt, and I discussed how this project came about and its relationship to what we are working on at CUNY specifically. So if you're interested in that presentation, I believe it's on YouTube. Anyway, my portion on this presentation is going to be fairly short, so that you can hear from Greta and Jonathan, who have yet to speak about this project, and who, since the last time I presented on this topic, have been getting into the weeds about the data mapping between ArchivesSpace and Wikidata. As you can see by this slide, we have many different institutional stakeholders working on our project. What is less apparent by this list are the various kinds of expertise here. We have folks who are archivists who are working in ArchivesSpace all the time. We have people who are who have no experience with ArchivesSpace but are really into Wikipedia and Wikidata. We have people who are strong catalogers. We have folks who are more on the development side. We have folks who are strong administrators. All of this is to say, and kind of stepping outside of this presentation for a moment and speaking generally, if any of these projects here today, or really the development of the ArchivesSpace application interests you, there's probably some way for you to participate, even if you don't identify as a developer or someone who is, overly fluent in metadata standards, or even if you're someone who's not even fluent in ArchivesSpace. We certainly need people to build the thing and document it and make sure all of that kind of stuff is solid. But we also need people to, make doodle polls and to call meetings and write grants and ultimately test the final product. Anyway, this ArchivesSpace community needs all of our experiences and expertise. And so with that, I'll kind of get off my soapbox and talk about how this project came about. So it all started with this email from Amanda Sorensen to the ArchivesSpace listserv early in 2025. Amanda at the time was working on a project at the Smithsonian, and they asked if there was a plugin tool available for pulling Wikidata agent information into ArchivesSpace. And there was not, but I can speak from our perspective at CUNY, we were kind of thinking along those same lines. We were also interested in using Wikidata in ArchivesSpace. We have a Wikimedian in residence who at the time was brand new. We were really interested in the power of using Wikipedia and Wikidata in classrooms, and how this platform could be used to connect archives with publishing on open data. So we got in contact with Amanda, and we started this group, and we brought in our colleagues who we knew were also using Wikidata. I think Greta and Jonathan, we actually had to look this up as we were preparing for this. They saw a comment actually on Wikipedia, on Wikidata, to one of their proposals to make an Ohio University ArchivesSpace agent property, where someone said, hey, there's a group that's working on making a Wikidata plugin for ArchivesSpace. And then, boom, they're on this working group. So this group kind of organically came together. And as we started working together, and kind of talking to one another about why we were there, and what kind of brought each of us to the table, there were some commonalities between us. We really liked Wikidata as an easy way for any archivist to create an authorized agent and also to have kind of a common ID number. And then also the power for Wikidata to represent someone who is hidden, who is maybe not represented in LC, who maybe doesn't have that literary warrant attached to them yet. We liked that Wikidata was multilingual, that could support multilingual description. Again, that it provides a unique identifier. And that it's really robust, that it's gives us the potential to contribute archives data to a larger open source, open data, linked data ecosystem, such as Wikipedia. So as we were talking, we decided that yes, a plugin would be a really great thing for us to develop something that was very similar to the LCNAF plugin that we all know, and that's part of the core code. We came up with some initial requirements, and they're listed here. We decided that in this first iteration of the plugin, we wanted something very simple. At the very least, something that that you could launch in the ArchivesSpace interface, that would at least be able to import the name and the number, the identifier from Wikidata. And then later on, there could be, the ultimate goal would be that there would be some kind of round tripping of data between using the plugin so that the data in ArchivesSpace could then be added to Wikidata. But that's kind of a long-term goal. We were fortunate to get a small grant to make this plugin a reality through the Wikimedia Community Fund. They have these rapid grants of just a kind of a small amount of money. We got $5,000. You can scan the QR code on your screen to see our proposal, as well as any comments that were made on our proposal. That's kind of an interesting feature of Wikidata and is in Wikipedia, is that it's all open and for you to see. Our goal is to have this project completed by June 2026. And in particular, to have our developer Harris really working on this in the new year. So actually, this is a great segue to bring in Greta and Jonathan, because their work is really setting us up to help the actual development of the plugin in the coming months. So Greta and Jonathan, take it away.
Thanks, Regina. So I'll be talking about the mapping work the group has been doing, show some examples, highlighting challenges, and talking about the agent work kind of more in general that we've been doing at Ohio University. Some of the challenges that we noticed kind of right away is that Wikidata, it's very structured. There's more consistency in a lot of ways, whereas ArchivesSpace has this very flexible hierarchy within it for the agent records. We were really thinking about what is the minimal viable product here, and we've kind of created the mapping definitely based on our local needs, and we'll be getting more feedback from the group. This is very much a work in progress, as we say on the slide here. And we're really trying to create that proof of concept rather than the robust universal tool that hopefully it could be in the future. Thinking about how much detail, how much info do we need to get from Wikidata to make this MVP? Is it even worth having a plugin? If we're just going to get the very, very minimum. So thinking about where we want it to go. And then we want to make sure that we were documenting edge cases. So thinking about, even if we are just looking at names and dates, which are more challenging than you might think, how do we provide enough examples so that it's useful? Other challenges, stuff we thought about, was kind of the free text fields versus the controlled value fields that both tools have. And then also just names and dates in general can be very challenging. Next slide. So here's an example of the Wikidata item on the left and the ArchivesSpace agent record on the right for Julia Johnson, who appears in one of our Civil War collections at Ohio University. She does not have a Library of Congress authority record, so we've gone ahead and created a Wikidata item for her, in part because we have this portrait of her and we've added that to Wikimedia Commons. She's also represented in the archives through letters she wrote and received from her husband while he was a surgeon during the Civil War. To compare the two agent records here, we can see that the Wikidata item is pretty flat. We have properties such as instance of, image, sex or gender, given name, family name, and date of birth. And in ArchivesSpace, we can see that many of the fields have multiple sections with nested information. So we have the record control information that has record IDs in it at the top, identity information with the name forms, and description information that has dates of existence, gender, and places. So, of course, the challenge is to match up the fields when there isn't quite this one-to-one match. Slide. Here's a list of the required fields for each type of agent in ArchivesSpace. So there's the four types: person, family, corporate entity, and software. And for each, really only a name is required to create an agent record. So this means that we as a group needed to define which fields from ArchivesSpace we wanted to map to Wikidata based on local use. Slide. And then here are the fields we're working with in ArchivesSpace that we would like filled in by the Wikidata plugin. So we have record identifiers. We've kind of limited it to Wikidata, Library of Congress name authority file, and SNAC as kind of our top three record identifiers we'd like to see pulled in to ArchivesSpace. But of course, there's opportunity there to add more. The name forms, we'd like those to include the authority ID, so showing that it's coming from Wikidata, and then the primary part of the name, the rest of the name, the suffix, the fuller form, and number, if applicable. We're still working our way through how we want those fields filled in, but that's kind of the idea. Having dates within the name form, but also in the separate place for dates of existence. And there you have the challenge in ArchivesSpace. You have the single date, you have the range date. So how is that brought in? We were also thinking about the biographical or historical note, which is found in the ArchivesSpace agent record, and that's a free text field. And that would really correlate to the description in Wikidata, which is usually very short, maybe not even a full sentence, that just tells you very briefly kind of who is this person. And then related external resources, so getting links to Wikidata, to Wikipedia would be very helpful to have as well. Slide. So this is a table that shows how we started to map out the fields. The second row here indicates which type of agent record you would want the system to create. So in Wikidata, you just have instance of, and then in ArchivesSpace, we would need it to map or to figure out, like, is this an instance of a human? Is this a corporate entity? Is this a family, etc.? We are still deciding if we want to include software in the MVP for this. We'd love to get your feedback if you think that we, definitely should do that. The third row here shows the places in Wikidata where the name information lives. So there's a label of the item, and then there are properties that give the given name, the family name. There could be a generational suffix or an honorific prefix. And you can see in ArchivesSpace, we're struggling with how to parse this information into the name fields. So this is kind of an ongoing thing that we're trying to figure out. Next slide. From the table that you just saw, we moved into Google Sheets to try to see the hierarchy of ASpace a little bit clearer. And then the fields that we want filled in, so such as authority ID, primary part of name, rest of name. We also put notes in here in the Excel file with some of the challenges we had while thinking this through. We thought about women's names and how to include maiden names and married names, and also edge cases, such as when in Wikidata there may be multiple places where names are represented or have rankings or are numbered. At our last group meeting, we discussed using the label from Wikidata instead of wrangling like given names, family names. But like I said, that's an ongoing conversation. We also wanted to indicate in this mapping what fields were required and what were optional. So this mapping in Google Sheets really has some extra information that's helping us think through how these things connect. Next slide. And here is another pass at creating the crosswalk. And this is a much simpler sort of, viewable way of seeing all the fields. This is kind of what we're moving towards and hoping to produce at the end of this. We use the arrows to kind of denote the hierarchy. But you can see that it's just kind of repeating a lot of things like the record identifier and the name forms. So that's kind of where we are at the moment with the crosswalk. Next slide. So like Regina said, we're going to how we got involved in this project. It was through creating an identifier property in Wikidata based on agents in the Ohio University ArchivesSpace instance. So here you can see what that looks like in Wikidata. This is the proposal. It was accepted, and it led to us being in contact with Carly at NYPL and Natalie at CUNY and learning about this project because they commented on our property proposal. So the agent ID property was approved. We have started using it. During the proposal process, there was discussion over whether there could be a universal ArchivesSpace identifier property in Wikidata or if each institution should have its own. There wasn't a definitive resolution about that, so it could be something for future consideration. We've moved forward with having our own, but definitely having a universal one seems like it would be a good thing to have. Next slide. So we have been using the LCNAF plugin a lot, but for, of course, people and organizations not in LCNAF, we've been creating Wikidata items and then copying and pasting that into ArchivesSpace. So that was the idea of a Wikidata plugin was a no-brainer to us. One reason for creating the Ohio University ArchivesSpace agent record property in Wikidata is so we can have bidirectional linking between ArchivesSpace and Wikidata, and we'd like to see that in our public-facing ArchivesSpace instance. So here we see the agent record on the public side for Julia Johnson with the related external resource link to Wikidata, which is in the lower right-hand corner. This is something you manually put into the external resources, but we would like to see all the record IDs in the agent record represented on the public side. At the top of the page, we have an example from the Rockefeller Archives that has links out to Wikipedia, Wikidata, VIAF, WorldCat, and SNAC. That's kind of more what we would like to see, but that was probably going to be another plugin or ticket request to ArchivesSpace. But we think this could be very important for future Wikimedia work and also for verifying our agents. So now I'll turn it over to Jonathan to talk a little more about kind of what we're doing with linked open data.
Thanks, Greta. Just a final note on that. We were basically coming at this from two different directions. And from our standpoint, it's how do we reduce the burden as an institution to our maintenance of, say, the external links? And that's sort of why the Wikidata identifier for enhancing that way was one of the things we wanted to export, because getting the Wikidata identifier allows you to automatically update and maintain the links to the pages about that individual as well, for those looking for broader context than the ArchivesSpace description. All right, next page, thank you. So as we talk about, integrating with Wikidata, one of the things we were thinking of is getting some of the community feedback on what are your use cases, because we're designing for our system. If we want to talk about designing the right minimal viable product, having more different use cases and workflows specifically, or other types of integrations would be useful. on how to approach that. So please, at the end, you'll see our emails. Please submit some comments to us, and we'll make sure to talk about that in our meetings. Or if you want to potentially join us, but we have a large group so far, so more voices sometimes gets more complex, but we'll make sure that you're involved where we can. So some of the things that we run into in the conversation about data imports, that's why we're limiting this to just pulling in the reagent record one time, not multiple imports. It might be a future plugin version, mainly due to the complexity that includes in terms of tracking the fields, which I'm glad to see the activity stream and potentially version control in the future. That would be a huge impact actually to enhancing the abilities for plugins like this to do imports safely and being able to audit that to make sure that the plugin isn't overriding data you don't want overriding. So behaviorally, that's one of the things we're thinking of. Other things we've talked about are how do we handle these imports? Do we do the fixes upon importing into ArchivesSpace? So pull what is there and then just adding it, but then you don't get the value in the commons of Wikidata. So the other option is encouraging people to fix in Wikidata first and then do the import so everyone benefits from when that item is linked. Those are some of the how do we fix any errors that might be present that we might notice. And also making sure that we do preview before saving. One of the other things that I would like to bring up is on the next slide, actually. What types of data would be useful to be able to help you identify uniquely that individual that or agent or entity that you are trying to link to? Some of that might be properties that Wikidata doesn't have, or it could be values that they need to have. Those could be ways that we could actually limit our plugins what it searches content-wise for quality purposes, and also help us to maybe streamline the types of models that we're relying on. So those things would be like positions. Also, things that we'd like to hear from you would be what types of queries would actually help to enrich when you're relying on this type of data to help navigate within, instead of just a plain text search, what type of relationships would be useful, and thinking about that from instead of building a Wikidata queue or property on a one-off basis, can we do more systematic work on, say, creating all of the instances of a position for a entity? If you're going down to that resolution, say a government entity, tell me all the people that all the positions in their executive office. If that's something that happens to be in your kind of archival collection. So trying to create categories of things that will help us to figure out what should be built in Wikidata to enhance the search and identification of the correct Wikidata queue to match to, which I think propagates out to various other authorities that are matching to Wikidata. And outside the scope, as we mentioned, is the opportunity for round tripping. Those are things about thinking about the next steps in ArchivesSpace. We're trying to identify what are our trouble points in this plugin process that maybe would be future proposals and enhancements to ArchivesSpace to facilitate more streamlined work for those, both pulling in one time, but also saving the next iteration, monitoring for changes and fixes, because that does happen in the common area. And with that, I'd like to open it up to the next slide, which is a community discussion for anyone who would like to place in chat, not just myself, but any of the presenters here will respond to that.
Thank you. Yeah.
And here's our
Great.
contact information.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you all. It's so exciting to see this project move forward and also just to hear how it came together in the way that it did. It's so interesting and also kind of like lucky in that way. Yeah, but if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and drop those into the Q&A. We do have a couple of minutes. We don't have any just a second, but we can wait. I also know it was a lot of information thrown at people very quickly in the past hour and a half. All right. I'm not seeing any questions pop up in the Q&A. I am going to speak very slowly because this always happens. So we'll see if one pops up, but we'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and say thank you to all of our presenters from all three of our presentations today. This was really interesting. I'm glad that it could come together so that we could do a presentation like this with 3 different projects doing different things that intersect in their own ways. And it's wonderful to see the possibility of when our community comes together and works together. And it makes me very excited about the future of the application, that all of this stuff is like happening out in the universe. And I'm just so excited to see it all come to fruition. And thank you for being willing to not just share it with us, but also to share in this way. I know that it's kind of nerve-wracking and we're coming up on the end of the year. So I really do appreciate all of the presenters. Thank you again to everyone who's also in attendance. I hope we can continue these discussions. I know that everyone, all of the panelists will continue to keep us updated. We will have, different feedback mechanisms coming your way through listservs and the poll, the QR code that Sela shared for Getty's work. I know that Wikidata will continue to share with us, and I'm really excited about everything that Yale is working on. So hopefully we can have other discussions, things happening in listserv, maybe some presentations at the forum. This work will continue. And if you're working on something at your organization and you think, wow, I can talk about that too, please let us know. It's so exciting to hear all of these things that are happening. We haven't gotten any other questions in the Q&A, so we are going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you all again and have a great rest of your day. See you at the next thing. Bye, everyone.